Shalom, my fellow individuals. Whenever I see people talk about the great classic RTS games, I'll usually see mentions of Age of Empires 2, Total Annihilation, and Warcraft 3. But I don't see as much buzz for Rise of Nations. It's not like it's obscure. You'd think winning Game of the Year awards, in a time period where a lot of people didn't consider game journalism to be a complete dumpster fire, would get talked about more. But it doesn't. In 2014, it got a re-release on Steam under a new developer around the same time as its sibling, Age of Mythology. I thought this was it. This was Rise of Nations' time to get back into the limelight. But again, it didn't. Age of Mythology even got a new expansion pack in 2016, and at the time of this video, a recent update, making the last time Rise of Nations was ever updated in 2017. Okay, even the people in charge of this game don't care about it. I'm going to take matters into my own hands and give attention to this forgotten, revived, and forgotten again classic. Since the extended edition is the most recent version of this game, making it the easiest version to acquire and get working at the time of this video, I don't know if it'll work in the year 2050. I'll be using that. Let's start with the artwork and visuals. It's cheating because I'm using the extended edition, but I like the visuals. I understand what I'm looking at, and there's nothing too funky like tanks appearing much smaller than infantry. A nice touch is that depending on the map type, your nation's citizens will appear in different clothing. The UI changes through the ages too. Then there's the soundtrack. My god, I think the soundtrack is amazing. Practically every track evokes some sense of emotion or imagination of a far-off land for me. I'm willing to argue that you could play some of these tracks with famous movie scenes and still get the same outcome. Oh yeah, while making this video, I discovered that the original composer, Dwayne Decker, has a YouTube channel. If you're watching this in a time period where he's still around, tell him shalom and give him some shekels. He's earned it. Compared to similar games from the time period, there's not much voice acting. Not that there's anything wrong with that. There's the narrator for the campaigns and tutorials.
Alexander the Great was one of history's most brilliant generals. Alexander was thrust onto the throne at a young age after the murder of his father, the king of Macedonia, in 336 BC. At the time of his death, 13 years later, his empire spanned most of the known world from Greece to India. Follow in his footsteps or forge your own path as you attempt to conquer the world.
And then there's the taunts. The taunts are great. They're perfect.
Dude, we know who you're going to take. Just pick them and get on with it.
Yeah, you know I may be slow, but I'm ahead of you, huh, Charlie?
Excuse me, is it over yet?
In fact, the only music track that has singing is the credits sequence. When it comes to the playable civilizations themselves, you've got a lot that someone would want to play as, like the Mongolians, most famous for Genghis Khan, who kind of came out of nowhere and ended up conquering a lot of land. The Romans, the great republic that became an empire. And the Egyptians, known for building the pyramids and being one of the earliest civilizations in human history. Also, fun fact, did you know the pharaoh Akhenaten basically introduced his own original character into the Egyptian religion? For those of you that don't understand, that would be like a pope changing the Christian lore to say Jesus had a wife, and it was through holding hands with her they gave him his superpowers. Now, in any game that has multiple playable characters or factions, balance is always going to be a concern. In the worst case scenario, some characters and factions are clearly better than others and you shouldn't even bother playing as the rest. Look at Shrek Super Slam. Shrek isn't even a top tier character in his own game. With 24 playable civilizations, each one having their own set of special bonuses, some of them sound as balanced as love between a giant and a dwarf when compared to others. However, I don't think that balance is too bad. Let's compare the Spanish, one that many consider to be the worst, with the Bantu, one that many consider to be one of the best. The Spanish start with the map explored while the Bantu build cities for 25% of the normal cost. Sure, the Bantu can spam out cities, but the Spanish will know where all the good stuff is. So while some nations do have more useful bonuses than others, you won't win or lose just because of which one you choose to play as. The gameplay in Rise of Nations can best be described as the sweet love child between Age of Empires and Sid Meier's Civilization. As a result of that Civ influence, Rise of Nations falls more into the 4X category than a traditional RTS. 4X meaning explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. That means you're not just managing a single city, you're in charge of an entire civilization. You're also going to be taking your people through 8 different ages, each one representing a different point in human history. And for the most part, each of them introduce something new, with the only one coming off as filler to me is the Enlightenment Age, because it doesn't introduce anything distinct. In contrast to something like Age of Empires, resource management is streamlined. Citizens form the backbone of your empire, gathering resources and constructing new cities and buildings for you. But resources are infinite. That means instead of having to micromanage depleted wood, you can focus more on the action. Like any good strategy game, Rise of Nations lets you customize your playthrough in a lot of ways. Merchants can collect rare resources that will provide you with extra resources and a special bonus. Ruins can be explored too, but they're pretty lame in this game. They only give you resources and nothing cool like a free technology or unit. One of 2 government types will aid you with being militaristic and aggressive or economical and defensive. Wonders also give you unique buffs and bonuses. The only thing lacking in customization is diplomacy. Compared to something like Civ, it's very limited. With other players, you can trade resources and sue for peace, war, or an alliance. That's it! There's no tech or territory trading. So if you're someone that likes to roleplay as NATO, you might want to find a different game. Combat is the usual rock, paper, scissors affair. Stuff like heavy ships are strong against light ships, machine guns are bad against tanks, and horses don't like getting penetrated by people with long, pointy sticks. You know, don't fix what isn't broken. By unleashing your inner war criminal, you can harm your enemy's economy by destroying their citizens and buildings. Remember, you can't be tried if there's nobody to report it. Scouts, patriots, generals, and spies are the only units in the game that can activate special abilities. Generals and patriots also boost the effectiveness of nearby units. Unit pathfinding while moving in a group isn't too bad either. They seem to understand that there's other units around them. And while it's not as smooth as it is in Age of Empires 2, it's still fine. Last but not least, you've got missiles. They're great! I can't think of a game where nukes aren't fun to use, and Rise of Nations is mostly no exception. Mostly because of one little thing. You see, if too many nukes are used, the world suffers nuclear annihilation and everybody dies. I can see why the devs chose to do this, but I can see why someone won't like it. Now, for as much as I like the gameplay, I have 2 big problems with it. The first one is with how the game handles technology and research. At the top of the screen are 5 buttons. The big one in the center is what you click on when you're able to advance to the next age, and the others are 4 technologies related to different aspects of your nation. That's good! I like that! What I don't like is that all the other research and upgrades are gotten through separate buildings. For example, you boost your population limit through the military tech at the top of the screen, but if you want to get attrition so that Bobby and the Boogaloo boys have a harder time attacking you, you have to build a tower and get it through that. Having the research be like this is fine for a traditional RTS like Age of Empires, because you're mostly managing a single city or home zone. However, since Rise of Nations is more of a 4X, like Civilization, you're not just managing one home zone, you're managing multiple. So if you want to research anything that's not at the top of the screen, you have to go looking around your nation. Although there is a hotkey that will cycle through your constructed buildings with available research, that's not really solving the problem. Technology and research should have been put into one area. Take Age of Wonders Shadow Magic for example. Everything you can research is on a single screen and the upgrades aren't too far away either. Buildings are pretty much just used to boost aspects of your cities or allow you to build certain units. Research is even streamlined in a complex game like Europa Universalis 4. Here's the research screen. If I research tech that unlocks a new land unit for me, I just have to open up the land unit building screen and select the new unit I want. My second problem is with managing all my cities after I get a certain number of them. By the end of one game, I had 42 of them and I wasn't even paying attention to half of them. Idle citizens automatically go to open gathering areas after some time. A city's created citizens can be rallied to nearby resource gathering areas. And units can be infinitely queued, so there are things there to help me out, but I still have a hard time keeping track of everything. I wish that there was some sort of system that allowed me to delegate functions to an AI or create some kind of friendly AI country that managed certain territories for me. Because I don't want to deal with the realistic consequences of managing an empire all by myself. And come on! Lots of countries throughout human history have had territory that they didn't control directly, but still had some sort of authority over. Here's what a map might look like at the start of a game. After some time, it might look like this. Chances are, I'm going to focus on the cities closest to the borders, because that's where a lot of the action is going to be. I'm not going to care much about what's going on further inside my own territory unless an immediate threat presents itself. This is a perfect example of the AI having a clear advantage over the player. While you're trying to capture cities on their border, they're defending those, fortifying the ones further inside, and doing who knows what else. Once you finally break through, you might be back at square one, where the borders have changed, but the next city is just as defended as the previous one. Plus, you now have yet another city to manage. If I could set an AI to manage a specific set of territory for me, I could focus more on the front lines and not have so many cities that are practically doing nothing. It'll be great if I could tell them to attack a specific enemy for me while I focus on another. Maybe they could even give me a specific percentage of their resources. Who knows? They could even try declaring independence from me. Or if I want to, I can integrate them into my nation so that I have direct control over their land. Europa Universalis 4's vassal system is a great example of what I'm talking about. They give me resources, manage land for me, and even help me out in wars. There is a setting that you can toggle in skirmishes/quick battles called the Cooperative AI. This would have been perfect for me because it does help with managing my empire by setting up buildings and citizens for me, but I have some big issues with it that keep me from using it. I couldn't tell it what I wanted to focus on doing for me. Plus, it basically plays the game for you. Look at this. The game just started and it's already building a city for me. There it goes again, building another one. As for the AI itself, I don't have much to say about it. I think they're pretty good, and unlike another strategy game, they don't make me want to take a long drop with a sudden stop. It is annoying that no matter how bad they're losing, they won't resign or quit, but I don't find that to be too big of a deal. The last things I'll talk about before the campaigns are the quick battle/skirmish and multiplayer modes. You're allowed to customize things like victory conditions, map size, and whether or not you start with a city. You know, the works. You can't give handicaps to specific players like starting age unless you're playing certain game modes, and you can't set difficulty levels for the individual AI, but I can live without those. For the multiplayer, I couldn't find many people to play with, and none of my friends were cool enough to do it with me. For comparison, this is what the lobby looked like in the 2013 Steam re-release of Age of Empires 2. Keep in mind that this is after the newer 2019 re-release of Age of Empires 2, which originally came out a year before this video did. I've got even more bad news for you if you're interested in playing this game for the multiplayer. Users on Steam are reporting that an update removed being able to play via LAN. They're right too. I don't see any options for it. It looks like the developers aren't just disinterested in this game. They're also trying to sabotage it. It just blows my mind that someone would go out of their way to remove features from their already released product. On the bright side, you could still try using older versions of Rise of Nations to play via LAN, and the multiplayer is pretty fun if you can get people to play it with. I remember one time a friend and I recreated the Imjin War as China and Korea against an AI Japan. We lost, but we had a good time. Alright, let's finally talk about the campaigns. You have a total of 5 of them. One based on Alexander the Great, the colonization of the New World, one of those times France was cool, the Cold War, and one where you pick a nation and try to conquer as much of the world as possible. Each one takes place on a turn-based map broken up into different territories. Here you can play cards that can help you in some way, like starting a map with more units, gaining another nation's special bonuses, and starting with more resources. There's some more in-depth diplomacy too, because you can trade territory. Depending on the campaign, you can even acquire vassals in client states. Wait, they implemented something like that for some of the campaigns, but not the regular game. When you attack a tile that doesn't belong to you, you'll start a battle and get a mission. These missions could be having to do things like capturing your enemy's capital, destroying a set number of buildings or units, or getting to a part of the map with a certain unit. Failing to capture an enemy's territory could set you back a few hours. You might have to deal with a counterattack, and if you fail that, you'll have to retake the land you just lost, on top of having to retry taking the land you failed to conquer in the first place. Therefore, I highly recommend using the secret, forbidden technique known as saving the game before every battle and reloading whenever you start losing. The generic Conquer the World campaign doesn't have much going on, so I won't talk about it. Alexander and Napoleon's have you taking on the role of the person they're named after. Napoleon's is more interesting because the first 6 turns are scripted, railroading you. After that, you're free to do as you please. In the New World, you can choose to play as one of the Europeans, the United States, or one of the Native Americans. A cool thing about this one is that there's asymmetric balance. Until the Enlightenment Age, the Europeans and Americans are unable to go above a certain population limit, and the Native Americans are unable to build a particular unit. Also, until they rebel, the Americans have to pay the British taxes each turn. You're also able to play as the Portuguese, which aren't playable in the regular game. I think the Cold War campaign is the most interesting because it has the most scripted events. It also allows you to launch nukes and perform top secret spy operations on the world map. Also, for some reason, this is the only campaign where there's a disclaimer that the map has been simplified and stylized for gameplay. None of the maps are historically accurate for their time periods, but this is the only map where they bother to mention this. So in my opinion, the campaigns aren't half bad. What they lack in spectacle, I think they make up for in gameplay. There are 2 things I love about them. You don't have to conquer everything on the map in order to win, you just need to own most of the territory, and, for the most part, they're open-ended. The player is able to win by any way they see fit. Okay, I might be giving them too much credit, but how many games have you played where you wish that you could just skip or not do certain parts? How about not having to deal with a certain character? Well, for the most part, Rise of Nations lets you do stuff just like that. Did you ever think that humanity was just having it too good during the Cold War and wish something bad happened? Rise of Nations lets you start World War III right there. Feel like being better than Napoleon and conquering Russia? You can do that too! So why does this game not get talked about more? Honestly, I don't know. I don't think it's because of the problems I mentioned earlier. Rougher games have done better. If you know anything about the original first generation of Pokemon, you'll know that those games are super broken. But that didn't stop Pokemon from becoming a massively successful franchise. Needless to say, their sequels are much better. As far as I know, Rise of Nations is nowhere near as broken as the first generation of Pokemon. The only thing I can think of is that there was just too much competition in the RTS market at the time. Of course, Rise of Nations isn't without its own set of problems. Its biggest shortcomings for me are that it chose to handle things like a traditional RTS when it should have gone 4X. But despite that, I love this game. I really enjoy this game's core mechanics. It's just so satisfying to go from a small, weak city-state to a big, girthy empire. Similar to a drug addiction, whenever I stopped playing it, partaking in it, thoughts of it occupied my mind. I've had days where I sat down for a quick game and ended up playing it all day. I think it's a very moist, very wet game, and it's a shame that it never got a direct sequel, because there's a very strong base here. The original developers did go on to make Rise of Nations, Rise of Legends, but I don't talk about Rise of Legends, because I've never played it. I don't know if we'll ever get a sequel, but hopefully someday a dedicated autist or another company could make a spiritual successor. Until then, the best that can be done is to act like a philosopher in ancient Greece, gazing into the sky and pondering the future.